Welcome, storytellers. And those of you who like your mysteries with a side of fear, this one's for you. I don't usually do horror, but when I heard about the Vanishing Hitchhiker of Highway 13, I couldn't resist. This story is like a bad dream, a nightmare that you can't wake up from. It'll leave you questioning everything you see and hear. It all starts with a seemingly ordinary road trip. A young woman hitchhiking along the desolate Highway 13, stemming a ride in the back of a pickup truck, seemingly out of nowhere. Was she kidnapped? Did she jump out of the truck? Or is there something more sinister at play? The driver of the truck, a mysterious man with a dark secret, soon pulls over and offers her a lift. But what they uncover is beyond anything they could have imagined. But as the miles roll by, it becomes clear that something is deeply wrong. The story takes a sharp turn when the hitchhiker mysteriously vanishes, leaving behind only a chilling note that reads, "I never should have gotten in the car." As the police close in on the driver, he becomes increasingly agitated, his fear palpable as they peel back the layers of this unsettling tale. So buckle up, storytellers. This is one ride you won't want to miss. The rain hammered against the windshield of Elias Vance's 18-wheeler, a relentless drumming that mirrored the dull ache in his chest. Highway 13, a ribbon of asphalt, notorious for its isolation and the unsettling quiet that clung to it, stretched endlessly before him. Tonight, it felt less like a road and more like a tunnel, closing in with every mile. The fog, thick as curdled milk, swallowed his high beams, reducing the world to a claustrophobic halo of light. Elias gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, the familiar hum of the engine doing little to soothe the gnawing grief that had become his constant companion since the accident. He blamed himself, a silent, corrosive guilt that had driven him back to the road, seeking solace in the ceaseless motion, yet finding only a deeper solitude. He was hours past his last stop, pushing through the night, chasing a deadline that felt meaningless. The only sounds were the wipers slapping a frantic rhythm and the occasional static hiss from the CB radio, a phantom conversation he was too weary to join. His eyes, heavy-lidded, scanned the desolate roadside, a reflex born of countless lonely nights. Then he saw her, a figure, impossibly still, standing on the shoulder of the highway. A young woman, her silhouette stark against a swirling fog, dressed in a long, tattered dress that seemed to ripple with the wind. Though there was no breeze Elias could feel. She wasn't hailing him, wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the oncoming headlights, drenched but seemingly oblivious to the downpour. A jolt, sharp and irrational, went through Elias. His first instinct, honed by years of caution, was to keep driving. But something held him, a strange, inexplicable compulsion that felt like a cold hand on his heart. Was it the sheer vulnerability of her stance? Or was it a subconscious echo of his own profound loss, projecting a desperate need onto this solitary figure? He couldn't say. All he knew was that his foot was already easing off the accelerator, the powerful truck beginning its slow, reluctant deceleration. He pulled the rig onto the narrow shoulder, the air brakes hissing like a dying beast. The woman remained motionless until he was fully stopped. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace that was almost eerie, she turned and approached the passenger door. Elias leaned over, unlatching it. The interior light, a dim yellow glow, illuminated her face as she climbed in. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal, framed by dark, wet hair. But it was her eyes that truly unsettled him, wide, unblinking, and utterly devoid of emotion. They held an ancient, profound emptiness, like deep, still pools reflecting nothing. Her presence in the warm cab was strangely cold, a chill that seemed to emanate from her very being. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice a dry, papery rustle, barely audible above the rain. She offered no destination, no explanation, just that single, haunting name. Elias, unnerved but attributing it to his exhaustion, simply nodded. Okay. He watched as she buckled herself in, her movements stiff, almost mechanical. He tried to make eye contact again, but she kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, avoiding the light, her face partially obscured by the shadows. He put the truck back in gear, the tires crunching on the gravel before finding the asphalt. As he pulled away, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to emanate from the back of the truck, just beyond where Sarah sat. It was like a breath, a sigh, or a name called from a great distance. Elias dismissed it as the wind, or perhaps the groan of his old rig, but it left him profoundly unsettled, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. He glanced in a rearview mirror, checking the road behind him, where Sarah had been standing. A faint, unsettling glow lingered, like residual heat from a dying ember. And for a fleeting, horrifying second, he saw it, a blurred, spectral image of another figure, standing exactly where Sarah had been, its form indistinct but undeniably present, watching them drive off into the impenetrable fog. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the oppressive darkness of Highway 13. He shook his head, blaming it on sleep deprivation. He reached for the radio, intending to find some late-night talk show. But before his fingers even touched the dial, it crackled to life. Strange, old-fashioned tune, a melancholic waltz he'd never heard before, filled the cab. And then, almost imperceptibly, he heard it, a faint, tuneless humming, coming from Sarah. She wasn't looking at him, her eyes still fixed on the road ahead, but the sound, thin and reedy, was undeniably hers. A growing sense of dread began to coalesce in Elias's gut. This wasn't just exhaustion, wasn't just a strange hitchhiker. This was something else entirely. Something cold, something wrong. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the cab. Cade just offered Sarah a bottle of water, turning his head to face her, only to find the passenger seat utterly, impossibly empty. The seatbelt remained buckled, a taut strap across vacant air. The door was closed, latched tight. No sound of it opening, no whisper of movement, no rustle of her old dress. She was just gone. A cold, visceral dread seized him, far beyond the unsettling unease of moments before. This wasn't a trick of the light, or a hallucination born of fatigue. He'd seen her, heard her, felt the chill of her presence. He slammed on the brakes, the truck groaning to a halt, its tires kicking up gravel on the shoulder. The rain continued its relentless assault, a deafening white noise that only amplified the terrifying absence. He fumbled for his flashlight, his hands trembling, and threw open the driver's side door, the cold, damp air rushing in. He circled the truck, his beam cutting through the thick fog. Nothing. No footprints in the mud, no sign of anyone having exited. It was as if she had simply dissolved into the fabric of the night. He even checked the sleeper cab, a desperate, irrational hope that she might have slipped back there, but it was empty, dark, and still. The only thing he found was the faint, lingering scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. Defeated, Elias climbed back into the cab, the silence now a suffocating presence. He slumped into his seat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His gaze fell to the passenger seat once more, and that's when he saw it. Tucked neatly into the corner of the seat, almost hidden by the folds of the upholstery, was a small, tarnished silver locket. It was old, intricately carved with swirling patterns, and felt impossibly cold to the touch. This was his proof, tangible, undeniable. She had been real, and she had left something behind. He clutched the locket, the metal chilling his palm. As he did, a sharp, distinct tap, tap, tap echoed from the passenger side window. Elias flinched, his head snapping towards the sound. There, etched into the condensation on the glass, were 3 deep, unnatural scratch marks, as if something with long, Sharp nails had tried desperately to get out after Sarah vanished. The marks weren't on the outside, they were on the inside. His blood ran cold. He started the truck again, the engine roaring to life, a desperate attempt to drown out the growing terror. He pushed the speed, needing to put distance between himself and that stretch of road, between himself and the impossible. But the highway seemed to stretch endlessly, and the truck, once a comforting cocoon, now felt like a coffin. As he drove, the phenomena escalated. The truck lights, usually steady, began to flicker erratically, plunging the road ahead into momentary darkness before snapping back on, each blink sending a fresh jolt of adrenaline through him. The radio, which had played that strange waltz, now emitted only static, punctuated by faint, distorted whispers that seemed to coil around his ears just beyond the edge of intelligibility. He strained to hear, but they always faded before he could grasp a word, leaving only a chilling echo. He started seeing her, fleeting reflections of Sarah in his side mirrors, her empty eyes staring back, only to vanish when he turned his head directly. He'd catch a silhouette in the passing fog, a brief, ghostly outline that would disappear when he focused. And then there was the humming, that melancholic, reedy tune from Chapter 1, now faint but persistent, seeming to emanate from the empty passenger seat itself, a mournful lullaby for the dead. The psychological toll was immense. Leas, already fragile from his own grief, became a walking wreck. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by a constant, gnawing paranoia. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every sound in the truck became a potential manifestation. He saw Sarah's face in the faces of strangers at rest stops, heard her voice in the rustling leaves outside his window. His grief, instead of dulling, sharpened, intensifying with each terrifying encounter, blurring the lines between what was real and what was a horrifying figment of his unraveling mind. He was being haunted, not just by a ghost, but by his own guilt, amplified and given form by the desolate Highway 13. Then, as he was about to give up and pull over, a sharp, distinct tapping began to come from inside the truck's sleeper cab directly behind him. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, deliberate, then quickened, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. A scraping, bumping noise that moved from the back towards the partition behind his head. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that whatever was making that sound was not human. He pulled over again, heart pounding, flashlight clutched in his hand. He threw open the partition to the sleeper cab. Empty, dark, still, nothing was there. But the faint scent of decay, stronger now, hung heavy in the air. He was losing his mind, or something was trying to take it from him. Elias drove, but it wasn't driving anymore. It was an escape, a desperate flight from the confines of his own mind, or perhaps from something far more real. The tapping from the sleeper cab had ceased, but the silence that followed was heavier, more ominous than any sound. He gripped the locket in his hand, the cold metal a small, tangible anchor in a world that was rapidly dissolving into nightmare. Every shadow cast by the flickering headlights seemed to writhe. Every creak of the truck's suspension sounded like a whisper. The haunting, which had begun as subtle, unsettling clues, now escalated with terrifying speed. Objects in the cab, his coffee mug, a stray map, would shift or fall with no apparent cause. The temperature would plummet suddenly, leaving visible plumes of his breath in the frigid air, only to return to normal moments later. He felt cold. Unseen hands brush against his neck, or phantom fingers trace patterns on the back of his seat. Sarah's spectral form, once fleeting, now appeared with alarming clarity. She would materialize in his peripheral vision, a shimmering, translucent outline, always just beyond his direct gaze. Snap his head around, only to find the passenger seat empty, the space where she sat radiating an unnatural cold. She never spoke, but her presence communicated a profound, suffocating sorrow. laced with an almost desperate plea. Sleep became impossible. Every time Elias closed his eyes, Sarah was there, her empty gaze fixed on him, her lips moving in a silent scream. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak, dulling his senses, yet sharpening his fear. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he couldn't outrun this. He had to understand. He had to know. Reluctantly, Elias began to seek answers. He pulled into a greasy spoon diner at dawn, the kind of place where truckers lingered over stale coffee and local gossip. He tried to be casual, asking the grizzled waitress about any strange stories about Highway 13. She just grunted, wiping down the counter. But an old-timer, hunched over a plate of eggs at the end of the counter, slowly looked up. His eyes, roomy and ancient, held a flicker of something Elias recognized: fear. "Highway 13, the old man rasped, his voice like gravel. "They say it's got a hunger. Takes what it wants. Sometimes what it takes, it keeps." He paused, then added, "There was a girl. Sarah vanished decades ago. Never found a trace. Folks said she just walked right off the road and into the mist." He shook his head, then mumbled, "Don't go digging, son. Some things are best left buried." Elias pressed him, but the old man clammed up, his eyes darting nervously. Later that day, Elias visited a small, dusty county historical society, pretending to research old trucking routes. He found fragmented newspaper clippings, a missing person report from 1957, a brief mention of a young woman named Sarah Jenkins, last seen walking along Highway 13. The details were sparse, dismissed by the papers as a likely runaway. But the dates, the location, it all matched. That night, Elias learned of the old man's death. The news came over the CB radio, a local dispatcher reporting a freak accident at the diner. The old-timer had choked on his food, they said, but the dispatcher's voice had an odd tremor, and Elias's blood ran cold when he heard the next detail: a small, tarnished silver locket, found clutched in the old man's dead hand, identical to the one Elias carried. A wave of nausea washed over Elias. Sarah wasn't just haunting him. She was silencing anyone who might reveal her secrets. Or, perhaps, she was desperate for someone to listen, and the old man's dismissal had sealed his fate. The revelation of Sarah's name, her approximate age, and the fragmented details of her disappearance began to trigger unsettling parallels with Elias's own past tragedy. The feeling of being lost, the sudden, inexplicable absence, the lingering questions, it was all too familiar. He felt an uncanny, chilling connection to her, as if her unresolved sorrow was a mirror reflecting his own. Was she a manifestation of his grief, or was his grief a magnet drawing her to him? He was driving again, the truck cab feeling smaller, colder, despite the heater blasting. The melancholic humming filled the air, louder now, almost directly beside him. He glanced at the passenger seat. She was there. Not a fleeting reflection, not a shimmering outline. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, solid and terrifyingly real, her old-fashioned dress damp and clinging to her. Her dark, wet hair framed her face, which was pale, almost translucent, but undeniably present. Her empty eyes, those black pools of sorrow, were fixed directly on him. Elias's breath hitched in his throat. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak, could only stare back, paralyzed by a fear that transcended the supernatural. Then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, her head began to turn. Her gaze never left his, but her head continued to pivot, past him, past the driver's side window, till her empty eyes were fixed on something behind him, deep within the dark confines of the sleeper cab. Faint, almost imperceptible smile, thin and chilling, stretched her lips. The humming intensified, becoming a mournful, wordless song. Elias felt a cold, crushing weight descend upon him, as if something unseen had just settled in the space behind his seat, something Sarah was acknowledging. He was no longer just being haunted. He was being watched. And Sarah, the vanishing hitchhiker, was not alone. The image of Sarah, solid and terrifyingly real, her eyes fixed on the unseen horror behind him, was burned into Elias's mind. He hadn't slept in days, the hum of the truck now a maddening drone. The silence between its vibrations filled with phantom whispers. Tay. The locket, clutched in his palm, felt like a burning coal, a constant reminder of the old man's death and the chilling possibility that he was next. He was beyond fear now. He was operating on a desperate, primal need to understand, to unravel the knot that was tightening around his sanity. His research led him away from the main highway, down a series of increasingly overgrown, forgotten backroads. The old-timers' vague warnings, combined with the fragmented newspaper clippings, had pointed him towards what was once the old Jenkins farm, a place locally whispered about as cursed or swallowed by the woods. The GPS, usually reliable, flickered erratically, as if resisting his destination. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, a familiar stench that made his stomach churn. Finally, the road dissolved into a muddy track, barely passable. Through a tangle of skeletal trees, he saw it, the skeletal remains of an old farmhouse, its roof caved in, windows like vacant eyes staring out from a shroud of ivy. A collapsed wooden bridge, rotting and dangerous, lay across a stagnant creek nearby, the very creek mentioned in Sarah's missing person report, where her family had last seen her walking. This was it, the forgotten place. Elias cut the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of moisture from the trees and the frantic thumping of his own heart. He grabbed his flashlight, the beam a weak reassurance in the encroaching gloom, and stepped out into the mud. The ground felt soft, yielding, as if the earth itself was trying to reclaim the secrets buried beneath. He pushed through the overgrown brush, the branches clawing at his clothes, towards the farmhouse. The front door hung askew, groaning on a single hinge. Inside, dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light that pierced the broken roof. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old, dried blood. He moved through the decaying rooms, each step echoing loudly in the oppressive silence. The kitchen still held a rusted stove, the living room a collapsed fireplace. In what must have been a small study or den, tucked away behind a fallen bookshelf, Elias found it, a small leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and warped, tucked into a hidden compartment in the wall. It was Sarah's. Her delicate, looping script filled the pages, detailing the mundane joys of farm life. Her dreams of leaving Highway 13, and then, slowly, chillingly, the descent into despair. The journal revealed a truth far more sinister than a simple accident. Sarah had been in love, desperately so, with a local boy, a charming but ruthless drifter named Caleb. He had promised her a life away from the farm, a future in the city. But Caleb had betrayed her, not just emotionally, but financially. He had stolen her family's meager savings, the money meant for her escape, and planned to vanish, leaving her destitute and heartbroken. Sarah had confronted him on the old bridge, the very one now collapsed, the night she disappeared. She had threatened to expose him, and Caleb, in a fit of rage, had pushed her, not into the creek, but into the path of an oncoming, speeding vehicle. Hit and run, covered up by the local sheriff, who was Caleb's uncle. Sarah hadn't vanished. She had been murdered, her body hastily buried somewhere along the highway, her memory erased. As Elias read, the words on the page began to blur, replaced by a terrifying, immersive vision. He wasn't just reading, he was there. He stood on the old, rickety bridge, the fog swirling around him. He felt the biting cold, the desperate fear in Sarah's heart. He saw Caleb's sneering face, heard his cruel words, felt the violent shove. He heard the screech of tires, the sickening thud, Sarah's choked gasp, and then the distorted, blood-curdling scream that echoed endlessly in his ears. He felt the cold, hard ground beneath him, the crushing weight, the fading light. The vision was punctuated by the chilling sensation of unseen eyes watching him from the surrounding darkness. A malevolent presence that reveled in the tragedy. He could smell the fear, taste the metallic temps of blood in the air. He gasped, snapping back to reality, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. The journal lay open in his trembling hands. The last entry, scrawled in a desperate, almost illegible hand, was not about Caleb. It was a chilling plea, seemingly directed at him, Elias. Across the decades, he watches, he waits, he feeds on the lost. Don't let him take you to. Highway 13 claims more than just lives. It claims souls. The ink was faded, but beneath it, a faint reddish-brown stain marred the page, as if written in her own blood. Elias's reflection in the cracked glass of a broken window showed a man on the brink. His eyes wide with terror and a dawning, horrifying understanding. Sarah's story wasn't just a local legend. It was a mirror. His own past tragedy, the loss he blamed himself for, the accident that had shattered his life. It wasn't a coincidence. He realized his connection to Sarah wasn't just about her haunting him. It was about her trying to warn him, or perhaps to guide him to what he didn't yet know. He looked down at the anachronistic locket in his hand, then back at the journal. As he closed the journal, something small and metallic clinked on the floor beside his foot. He bent down, his flashlight beam revealing it, a tarnished, brass military dog tag, clearly much older than Sarah's time, catched with a name he couldn't quite make out and a faded serial number. It was similar in age and material to Sarah's locket, but belonged to someone else entirely. Elias picked it up, feeling a profound chill. Sarah wasn't the only one trapped here. Highway 13 was a graveyard of lost souls, and something, an unseen presence, was collecting them. The journal had hinted at an unseen presence that wasn't Caleb. Was this dog tag a clue to its identity, or a warning of its true power? He felt a new, deeper dread. He was not just dealing with Sarah's ghost, but with something far older, far more sinister, that fed on the tragedies of Highway 13. The cold brass of the dog tag felt impossibly heavy in Elias's palm, a counterweight to the searing truth of Sarah's journal. He watches, he waits, he feeds on the lost. The words echoed in the decaying farmhouse, chilling him to the bone. Sarah wasn't just a victim. She was a warning, and a dog tag, a relic from another forgotten tragedy on this very highway, was proof that Sarah's tormentor was not unique to her. This was a pattern, a cycle. He stumbled out of the farmhouse, the oppressive silence of the woods pressing in on him. The air, once merely damp, now felt thick, suffocating, as if something unseen was draining the very oxygen from his lungs. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like footsteps closing in. He felt a phantom weight settle on his chest, a crushing pressure that made breathing a conscious, agonizing effort. Was it the weight of the truth? Or was he already here, watching, waiting? Back in the truck, the familiar hum of the engine offered no comfort. It sounded strained, almost like a growl. Elias fumbled with the dog tag, trying to make out the faded etching. He squinted, the letters slowly resolving. P.V. T.J. Miller, 1943. A name, a year. He remembered a dusty article in the Historical Society, a brief mention of a young soldier who vanished while hitchhiking home from a local base during World War II, his body never found. Another lost soul on Highway 13. And suddenly, Elias saw it, the chilling parallel. The soldier, like Sarah, had been betrayed, abandoned, his hopes for a future cruelly extinguished. And like Elias himself, he had been returning from a place of profound loss, carrying a burden of guilt. The realization hit him like a physical blow, a cold wave of understanding that washed over his terror. Sarah's death wasn't just similar to his own tragedy, it was a direct precursor. The unseen presence Sarah warned about, the entity that fed on the lost, had been drawn to Highway 13 by her violent end, and it had grown stronger, feeding on the despair and unresolved grief of every soul claimed by this desolate stretch of road, including the soldier, J. Miller. And now it was feeding on him. His own profound guilt and sorrow over the accident had made him vulnerable, a beacon for this malevolent force. Sarah hadn't just been a random hitchhiker. She was a desperate messenger. Spectral alarm bell trying to warn him before he became another permanent resident of the highway's dark embrace. As this horrifying truth solidified, the truck itself seemed to rebel. The engine roared, not with power, but with a guttural, animalistic sound, revving uncontrollably, even though Elias's foot was nowhere near the accelerator. The dashboard lights flickered wildly, then died, plunging the cab into near darkness, illuminated only by the intermittent flash of lightning outside. The steering wheel began to fight him, wrenching violently to the left, then to the right, as if an unseen hand was trying to drag him off the road into the swirling, hungry fog. Scotty wrestled with the wheel, his muscles screaming, sweat stinging his eyes. He glanced into the rearview mirror, and his breath caught in his throat. His reflection stared back, but it wasn't just Elias. His face was contorted, skeletal, decaying. But it was also overlaid with the empty eyes of Sarah, and then, horrifyingly, the gaunt, sparing face of his lost loved one from the accident. They were all there, a grotesque mosaic of the damned, staring out from his own eyes. The image flickered, then solidified into just his own terrified face, but the memory of what he'd seen clung to him like a shroud. This wasn't just about Sarah finding peace. It was about Elias fighting for his very soul. Highway 13 wasn't just a road. It was a hungry maw, a conduit for something ancient and malevolent that thrived on human despair. Sarah was trapped, not just by her death, but by the lingering echoes of the secrets surrounding it, and by the entity that held dominion over this cursed stretch of asphalt. He understood now. If he failed to help Sarah, if he succumbed to the entity's influence, he wouldn't just be trapped in psychological torment. He would become another ghost of Highway 13, his truck found abandoned, spirit forever bound to the road, another meal for the unseen presence. The stakes were no longer just his sanity. They were his very existence, his eternal rest. He had to confront this, not just for Sarah, but for himself, and for all the lost souls Highway 13 had claimed. The roar of the truck's engine was a distant echo, drowned out by the frantic thumping of Elias's heart. He was driving back, drawn by an invisible, irresistible force, back to the decaying farmhouse and the collapsed bridge. Highway 13, once a symbol of escape, was now a funnel, drawing him inexorably towards its dark heart. He clutched the locket and the dog tag, the cold metal biting into his palm, grounding him in the horrifying reality. This wasn't just about Sarah. It was about the entity, the he that fed on despair, that had claimed J. Miller and countless others, and was now reaching for him. The fog was thicker here, swirling like a hungry beast, swallowing the weak beam of his headlights. The air was heavy, saturated with the stench of damp earth, mildew, and that metallic sweetness that now tasted of old blood on his tongue. The truck, though still fighting him, seemed less hostile, almost resigned, as if it knew its destination was inevitable. He pulled up to the muddy track leading to the farmhouse, the engine sputtering into silence. The quiet that followed was profound, unnatural. No crickets, no wind, just the drip of water from the skeletal trees and the ragged sound of his own breathing. He grabbed his flashlight, its beam trembling in his hand, and stepped out into the oppressive gloom. The farmhouse loomed, a black silhouette against the gray mist. As he approached, the air grew colder, the temperature dropping so sharply that frost began to form on the sparse blades of grass around his feet. Now, low, mournful hum, the same tune Sarah had hummed, filled the air, emanating from the gaping maw of the farmhouse doorway. He pushed through the broken door, the wood groaning like a dying man. Inside, the darkness was absolute, impenetrable, even by his flashlight. The beam seemed to be absorbed, swallowed by the oppressive void. He raised the locket, its tarnished silver glinting faintly, and, as he did, a cold, crushing weight descended upon him, forcing him to his knees. The stench of decay intensified, burning his nostrils, making him gag. Then she appeared. Not a reflection, not a shimmering outline. Sarah stood before him, fully manifested, as solid and real as he was, yet radiating an icy cold that pierced him to the bone. Her old-fashioned dress was no longer tattered, but pristine, though still damp. Her dark hair cascaded around her pale face, and her eyes, those empty pools, were no longer devoid of emotion. They were filled with an agonizing sorrow, a desperate plea, and a profound, ancient terror. She raised a translucent hand, and Elias felt a searing pain behind his eyes as a torrent of images, sounds, and emotions flooded his mind. He was no longer Elias Vance. He was Sarah Jenkins. He felt the crushing weight of Caleb's betrayal, the bitter sting of his cruel words on the bridge. He felt the shove, the sickening lurch as he fell. He heard the screech of tires, the blinding flash of headlights, the agonizing impact. He felt the cold, hard ground, the broken bones, the fading light, the agonizing struggle for breath. He tasted blood, felt the creeping numbness. And then, the true horror. As life drained from his body, he felt a presence, cold and immense, descend upon him, a vast, ancient hunger. It wasn't Caleb's ghost. It was something else, something that had been lurking on Highway 13, drawn by the despair, waiting for a soul to claim. It was the entity. He felt its tendrils, cold and sharp, reaching for his essence, binding him to the road, to the endless cycle of suffering. Elias screamed, a raw, guttural sound torn from his throat as the vision receded. He was back in his own body, trembling, drenched in a cold sweat, but the sensations lingered, the phantom pain, the taste of blood. Sarah stood before him, her face now a mask of profound relief, as if, finally, someone understood. But then, the air in the farmhouse grew impossibly heavy, the darkness deepening, coalescing into a formless, swirling mass behind Sarah. A guttural growl, not from the truck, but from the very foundations of the earth, vibrated through the floor. The entity had been drawn by the raw emotion, by the sheared truth. It was here to claim them both. Sarah's eyes widened in terror, her spectral form flickering. She turned, her gaze fixed on the encroaching darkness. And then, with a desperate, silent plea, she looked back at Elias. She extended her hand. Not in accusation, but in warning, her lips forming a single, soundless word. Run. But Elias couldn't. He understood now. Sarah wasn't just a ghost seeking peace. She was a lure, a desperate attempt to warn him to break the cycle. The entity wasn't just feeding on the dead, was feeding on the living who carried the weight of the past. His own guilt, his unresolved grief, had made him the perfect prey. He was bound to Highway 13, just as Sarah was. A cold, skeletal hand, not Sarah's, but something ancient and decaying, reached out from the swirling darkness behind her, grasping at Sarah's flickering form, pulling her back into the abyss. Sarah let out a silent, agonizing scream, her eyes fixed on Elias, a final, desperate message of warning. Elias knew his choice: succumb and join the chorus of lost souls on Highway 13. His truck found abandoned, his spirit forever bound. Or fight. Fight for Sarah, fight for Jay Miller, fight for his own soul. He staggered to his feet, the locket and dog tag burning in his hand. He had to break the cycle, He had to sever the entity's hold. He had to confront his own guilt, his own demons, and find a way to truly let go. This wasn't just a confrontation with a ghost. It was a battle for his very existence. The guttural growl of the entity had ripped through the farmhouse, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of reality. Elias, fueled by a primal surge of defiance, had lunged forward, not at the monstrous darkness, but towards the flickering, desperate form of Sarah. He didn't know what he intended, only that he couldn't let him claim her. As his hand, still clutching the locket and dog tag, reached out, a blinding flash of white light erupted from the locket, searing through the oppressive gloom. The light wasn't warm. It was cold, pure, and utterly alien, momentarily pushing back the encroaching darkness. A piercing, silent shriek tore through Elias's mind. Its formless mass churning violently before dissolving back into the shadows, leaving behind an unbearable cold and the lingering stench of ozone and decay. Elias collapsed, gasping for air, his body trembling uncontrollably. The farmhouse was still, the oppressive weight lifted, but the silence was not peaceful. It was the silence of a battlefield after the war, heavy with echoes of what had transpired. Sarah was gone. Not vanished in the truck this time, but pulled away, or perhaps released by the brief, blinding light. Elias lay there for what felt like an eternity, his mind reeling, the vision of Sarah's death still vivid, the taste of blood still on his tongue. He was alive. He had fought, and he had, somehow, survived. He dragged himself out of the farmhouse, the first rays of dawn painting the sky in bruised purples and grays. The air outside felt thin, almost brittle, but it was clean, free of the suffocating presence. He stumbled back to his truck, his muscles screaming in protest, every joint aching. He started the engine, and this time it purred to life, a comforting, familiar sound, free of the malevolent growl. He drove, not with the frantic desperation of before, but with the profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The direct haunting had ceased. Sarah no longer appeared in his mirrors, no longer hummed her melancholic tune beside him. The truck lights held steady. The radio played only static or the occasional distant chatter of other truckers. The cold spots were gone, but Elias was profoundly changed. The psychological scars remained deep and raw. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful, haunted by fragmented nightmares of the farmhouse, of Sarah's dying scream, and of the formless, hungry entity. He would wake in a cold sweat, the phantom taste of blood in his mouth, the scent of decay lingering in his nostrils. He consciously avoided Highway 13. His routes shifted, taking him hundreds of miles out of his way, a silent, unspoken pact with the cursed stretch of road. He knew its secrets now, understood its hunger, and he had no desire to ever cross its path again. If he ever had to, if a detour forced him, a cold dread would settle over him, a profound respect for the dark power that still lingered there, waiting. The locket, which he now wore around his neck, felt like a constant reminder, a heavy weight against his chest. Sometimes, late at night, when he was alone in his cab, he would feel a faint warmth emanating from it, a warmth quickly followed by a distant, almost imperceptible humming. It wasn't menacing anymore. It was melancholic, a faint echo of Sarah's sorrow, a reminder of the thin veil between worlds and his own terrifying brush with the supernatural. He would glance at the passenger seat, and for a split second, he would see a faint shimmer, residual image of Sarah, less terrifying, more like a melancholic memory, a silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal. Elias began the long, arduous process of healing from his own past tragedy. The confrontation with the entity had forced him to face his deepest guilt, to acknowledge the pain he had suppressed for so long. He started talking, hesitantly at first, to a therapist recommended by a fellow trucker, slowly unraveling the tangled threads of his grief. He even called his estranged sister, the first step towards mending the family ties that had frayed after his loss. He found a new purpose, a quiet determination to live, truly live, for those he had lost and for himself. One quiet afternoon, he found himself at a small, forgotten cemetery, not far from Highway 13, but far enough that the oppressive feeling didn't reach it. He had researched Sarah Jenkins's family, found their plot. There was no headstone for Sarah, only a blank space. He carefully dug a small hole at the foot of her parents' grave. He placed a tarnished locket there, and beside it, a brass dog tag of PVT, J. Miller. He covered them with earth, then placed a smooth, gray riverstone on top. "Rest now, Sarah," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "and you too, soldier. Your stories won't be forgotten, not by me." It was a small act, but it was a beginning, a way to honor their lost lives and to find a measure of peace for his own. The direct haunting was over, but the echoes lingered, a constant, subtle reminder that some roads and some inner demons are never truly free of their past. Months bled into a year, then two. Elias Vance still drove the highways, but the man behind the wheel was fundamentally different. The gaunt, haunted look had softened, replaced by a quiet resilience. He still carried the weight of his past, the grief for his lost loved one, but it no longer defined him. As the therapy had helped, slowly untangling the knots of guilt and self-blame. He spoke to his sister regularly now, their conversations tentative at first, Atea, then growing warmer, rebuilding the bridge that had crumbled between them. He found a new appreciation for the simple things: the sunrise over distant mountains, camaraderie of fellow truckers at a diner, the quiet solitude of the open road, now a sanctuary rather than a torment. He hadn't turned it on. The static was thick, then a voice, distorted and reedy, like wind through dry leaves, filtered through the speaker. It was Sarah's voice, unmistakable, yet different. He gripped the edge of his bunk, his knuckles white. Wait, for what? Or was he now bound to the highway in a new, terrifying way? Or was he a guardian of its secrets, or another part of its enduring curse? Had he, in saving Sarah, inadvertently taken her place, destined to guide others, or perhaps to become the next vanishing hitchhiker? A spectral warning for those who dared to travel Highway 13. Less desperate, more knowing. Kalis lay there in the darkness, listening to the hum of the distant highway, a sound that now carried a new, chilling undertone. He had found peace, yes, a fragile, hard-won peace, but Highway 13 still held its secrets. And some roads, he realized, never truly let you go. The legend of the vanishing hitchhiker continued, a testament to the road's dark allure, and Elias Vance. The truck driver, who had faced the impossible, was now, in a way he could never have imagined, subtly part of it. He never drove Highway 13 again. It wasn't a conscious decision made in anger or fear, but a natural aversion, deep-seated understanding that some places were best left undisturbed. He walked into the restroom, splashed cold water on his face, and looked up at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes, though still tired, held a newfound clarity. The faint, almost translucent pallor of Sarah's face overlaid his own, her dark, wet hair briefly framing his features. Eyes, those profound, empty pools, stared back at him from his own reflection. Filled with a sorrow so vast it threatened to consume him, was gone as quickly as it appeared. A mere flicker, but it was enough. Elias stumbled back from the mirror, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was still Elias, but the line between himself and the highway's lingering echoes felt terrifyingly thin. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a wry smile touching his lips. He was healing. He was moving on. He knew its secrets now, the hunger that lurked beneath its asphalt, the souls it had claimed. He carried the memory of Sarah, not as a tormentor, but as a somber reminder of a profound, terrifying truth. Her melancholic humming still echoed in the quietest corners of his mind sometimes. A faint, almost imperceptible melody that was less a haunting and more a lingering echo of a shared, impossible journey. One crisp autumn evening, after a long haul, Elias pulled into a truck stop, the kind with bright fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee. But then, for a split second, it happened. His reflection shimmered, distorted. His own eyes, tired and human, seemed to deepen, to darken, taking on an impossible, ancient emptiness. Later that night, as he settled into his bunk, the CB radio crackled to life. "Thank you, Elias," the voice whispered, the words barely audible above the static. "It's your turn to wait." A profound chill settled over Elias, deeper than any cold spot, more unsettling than any spectral manifestation. He never heard the voice again. The CB radio remained silent, the static gone. Welcome, storytellers. And those of you who like your mysteries with a side of fear, this one's for you. I don't usually do horror, but when I heard about the Vanishing Hitchhiker of Highway 13, I couldn't resist. This story is like a bad dream, a nightmare that you can't wake up from. It'll leave you questioning everything you see and hear. It all starts with a seemingly ordinary road trip. A young woman hitchhiking along the desolate Highway 13, stemming a ride in the back of a pickup truck, seemingly out of nowhere. Was she kidnapped? Did she jump out of the truck? Or is there something more sinister at play? The driver of the truck, a mysterious man with a dark secret, soon pulls over and offers her a lift. But what they uncover is beyond anything they could have imagined. But as the miles roll by, it becomes clear that something is deeply wrong. The story takes a sharp turn when the hitchhiker mysteriously vanishes, leaving behind only a chilling note that reads, "I never should have gotten in the car." As the police close in on the driver, he becomes increasingly agitated, his fear palpable as they peel back the layers of this unsettling tale. So buckle up, storytellers. This is one ride you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching. See you guys next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. So, yeah, I was just playing around with some ideas, and I had this idea for a video where I would just react to the comments on my videos and respond to them and stuff, okay? And then I thought it would be funny if at the end of the video I would say something like, "Don't forget to like and subscribe," or leave a comment down below, and then see how many people actually did it. So, let's test it out. Yeah, so thanks for watching and stuff. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. I want to see how many people actually do it. Okay, bye.